What's going on, guys? I know it's been a little while, but I'm finally releasing a new video today, and I'm going to be making the elemental stones from the Fifth Element movie. Now, these are pretty straightforward to 3D print. You can find the models online, but I thought I'd take it one step further and add fibre optic lighting and a chassis to hold the lighting system. And then I thought I'd make these little frame things that diffuse the lights. So, yeah. Want to take a look? Now, these things look okay in the light. And there's two different ways that you can use them. Obviously with the diffuser around them, they get this little star pattern, or you can just use them with the fibre optic showing, but they really come to life when it's a bit darker in the room. By now, you're probably wondering how I made them, so yeah, without further ado, let's get started. Okay, let's get the 3D modelling out of the way first. I began by modelling the chassis that are going to hold the lights. These were made to fit snugly inside the elemental stones. I split the chassis into two halves to make printing easier and to allow the models to slot together later on. The cylindrical shape you see in the middle will be used to hold the torch. I then began plotting out all the holes for the fibre optic cables. I spent quite a while working on this to make sure that they were evenly spaced and weren't packed too densely. I then started working on a cone to pull all the fibre optic cables together inside the chassis. The Wikipedia page you're seeing is the formula I used to calculate the size for the cone. More on that later. Then, after a little cleanup, it was time to send all the models over to the 3D printer. This took quite a while. I think all in all it came to a total of just under 4 full days. So now we've got the stones printed off, we need to remove all the support material. You can see I've already started on a couple of the pieces, and I've still got a lot of work to do. It's actually kind of tricky to do this, and because I'm an idiot, I printed it with like really dense support material. And also my printer was kind of playing up at the time, so some of them are a little under extruded. After removing all the support material, it was time to push the top halves of the models that I designed into the top halves of the elemental stone models. Then came the very laborious task of drilling 216 2mm holes in the top of all of them. Now, I actually struggled with choosing the paint for this project for quite a long time. I ended up settling with this Rust-Oleum stone texture finish in mineral brown and Plasticoat in, I think, French grey. I was pretty worried about getting this wrong, so before choosing, I spoke with a few people on the Nerdforge Discord, and we came up with a few ideas. I then reached out to the owner of the Etsy store Fever Dream Supreme, who had some really amazing elemental stone replicas. I promised him a shout out in return for him letting me know the secret to his amazing paint jobs, and it turns out it's just a light coat of the textured finish spray paint. I was a little concerned at first because the colour that he recommended was really dark, but with just like a light mist over the top, it seemed to work pretty well, and I got some really good results, so big shout out to him. If you're looking to get some elemental stones similar to ones I've got, but without the lighting of course, I'd really recommend checking out his store. They're by far some of the best ones that I've seen so far. Okay, so I've done a fair few coats on these now. I've pretty much finished one whole can of the grey-green spray paint, whatever colour it was. Reason being is I kind of realised that I forgot to do any sanding and filling on these before painting, and I thought rather than waste all the layers that I'd already put on, I'd just try and fill it with the spray paint. It's not worked particularly well, but I mean, it's good enough for me at this point. I think I'm relatively happy with how they're looking. There are a few seams that you can see, you may be able to spot them on this one, and that one in the back there, but for the most part they're not too bad. The next step, I've bought another can of this stuff. This is the textured stone finish, or stone texture finish, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to try and go over the top of these with this stuff now. So the first time I went over this, it gave the actual, like, this base layer a load of texture. That's worked quite well. Probably didn't need it, although I was just experimenting at the time, I guess. So now I've got the new can, we're going to spray them with this stuff, and hopefully that's going to be more or less the finished effect. That's looking pretty good to me. Seems to have done a pretty damn good job of hiding the seams as well, which I'm quite happy with. With all the parts now printed out, we can start work on the actual lighting element of this project. This stuff right here is fibre optic cable. It's made from HDPE, that's high density polyethylene, and although you can buy HDPE for 3D printers, like on a spool, similar to this, I'm not sure whether that stuff's capable of like transmitting light in the same way that the fibre optic cable does, which is why I chose to use this over the 3D printed material. This didn't come on the spool originally, I put it on the spool just for storage because I've had this a little while. What we're going to be doing is unrolling this stuff and heating it with a heat gun so that it'll kind of retain its like straight shape, because at the minute it just wants to return to the spool, and we don't want that. We want these things to basically stand up on end. In terms of length, I think we want to be going for about 1.5 times the length of one of these 3D printed elemental stones. That means we're going to have 1 times the height sticking out of the top and half of it, well, not half of it, part of it in there. Welcome back to another episode of Cooking with Josh. Last time you joined me in my kitchen, we were ovening some LED matrix ski goggles. Check out the video up there. And with that shameless self-promotion out of the way, let's get started. So today we're going to be making noodles. HDPE noodles. Here's the plan. You may have seen a similar setup to this before if you've followed anything in the 3D printer world. It's a water tray for a pull extruder. A pull extruder basically pulls like filament out of soda bottles or stuff. And I've seen a lot of these trays used, or similar trays, with holes going through and water running to basically cool the filament afterwards. We're going to be using just this part, pulling it by hand, and then I've got my little aluminium thing over here with a mark on it so we can see exactly how much we need to cut off. This end I have my filament holder, and we've got some rubber mats down just so that we don't heat up the worktop too much, because we're going to be blowing a heat gun down in this direction while the stuff is pulled in this direction under the water, cooling off, and then we can cut it at this end. Now, looking back, I probably spent far too much time doing this. The whole process was pretty slow, in all honesty, and it was just made even worse because I had to like cut the stuff every single time that I moved it about a metre or so. When I'd finally had enough of doing these things one by one, I decided a different approach was in order. I started by cutting these things all to the same length, and then started running my boiling tap, and I put a pan in the bottom of the sink just to make sure that the boiling tap didn't get so hot that it cracked the sink, because that has actually happened before. Anyway, I started running the hot water over the fibre optic cable, and this did a pretty good job of straightening out the middle parts. I then held the stuff up vertically and just let the water run down it to the point where they were able to like straighten themselves out. Gravity did most of the work here, and it worked out pretty well all in all. I also went over them again with the cold tap whilst holding them in position just to make sure that they got like as solidified as possible. Well, that worked out far better than I could have expected. Most of these have turned out pretty straight. There are a few that aren't perfect, but I think all in all, pretty good job. You're probably thinking these look a little bit long. There is a reason for that. So initially I started by cutting these to the exact length that I needed, which was about half of this. Then I realised the ends that I was cutting ended up getting a little bit bent. So I think to fix that, the best thing I could advise is doing them double length like this. The middle's always going to be probably the straightest part. So if we were to cut in the middle, these would be the ends that are on show, and then the potentially bent ends could be the parts that go inside where the torches live. Now, the next step, I want to split these into, I guess, like a third of a pile, and then with that third, we'll be cutting them into, I guess, thirds, and then the other ones we're going to be cutting in half. Reason being, when I have this thing finished, I want there to be like some variation in the lengths of like the fibre optic cables, and I guess this is probably the best way to do it in like some kind of equal way. And again, just pointing out, that's the cut ends. I'm going to put those all together, so they're all at this end now. So we know that these are the straightest parts, and those are the ones that are potentially going to have bends in them. So I think it's probably worth going over the lighting element of this project. We're going to be using torches. What are we actually going to be doing with this torch? I'm going to be disassembling it and I guess modifying it ever so slightly. At the minute, it's got a lens in there. You can actually disassemble these if you unscrew the top part instead of the bottom part. You can then push on the spring part in there, and that'll just push the lens and like the little retainer in there out of the front. There we go. So you see we've got the lens, that's the little retaining ring, the LED there with the heatsink, and that's just like the chassis, I guess. Now, we've got a few things to do. One of the main things is these lights need to be coloured. Obviously these are white LEDs, so not coloured. What we're going to be using to colour them is these things. So inside of here, We have, I believe they're called gel filters. So these things are used in videography quite a lot. I'm pretty sure they're used to change like the color of lights when you're like shooting something. So like studio lights they would go on the front of. And as you can see, I've already cut one of them up into a circle and melted it. Yeah, turns out these things get pretty hot, and I was using it behind the lens like so. Yeah, it melted within about 5 seconds. So what we're going to have to do is when we put these back together, you can notice there's a sliding mechanism in here. This basically is used to adjust the focus of the lens. What we're going to be doing is pulling this all the way to the back so that there's plenty of room between the lens and the gel thing so that the gel doesn't heat up and melt. Another thing that we're going to be doing is inverting this little lens. So by default, these sit this way up so that the dome is pointing upwards. We don't want that though. Reason being, if I remember from physics in GCSEs, I'm pretty sure using the dome this way, it'll spread the light out like in a V shape. But if we invert it this way, we should be able to, I guess, centralize the light, make it a lot more parallel. And now we have 4 different coloured torches. Now, if you guys thought that straightening out these fibre optic cables was going to be the most tedious part of this project, you were very sadly mistaken. I've now got to take one of these fibre optic cables and thread it through every single one of these little holes 4 times over. I'm not going to show a time lapse of pushing the fibre optic cables through every single one of these because it's going to be the exact same thing each time and it would take too long. So I'm just going to skip to what the next step is, and in this case we're going to push them a little bit further through so I can get a decent grip of them. When I've got a grip on them on this end, we're going to be bundling them together, and we've printed off some, I guess, cones. Those are going to go over the whole bundle, and then we can melt the ends of these together. So this is one of the cones. This is going to fit over the head of one of the torches. The thinner end is the part that's going to bundle all of these together. And the way I found out the radius for this, you may have seen very briefly at the beginning of the video. So there's this mathematical equation. It's basically known as circle packing. And by knowing, I guess, the diameter of these circles, like if we imagine them as circles or cylinders or whatever, we can basically calculate how many circles we can pack inside of a larger circle. And it will, I'll be honest, I didn't use the equation, I used an online calculator. But if you feed it all the numbers, so diameter of that, diameter of that and number of these, then it will give you the diameter of this circle that you need. So that was actually quite a fun little equation I didn't know about. I'm, like I said, didn't use the equation, used a calculator, but it's just good to know these kind of things. Now with the cone on, I'm going to push this thing up a little bit. It does get a bit springy and want to like remove itself, so I'm just going to keep my thumb there in the meantime. And with this thing laid on its back, I'm just going to pull on these one by one from the top until they're just disappearing behind the PLA on this cone. Now for fire, and you should definitely be doing this in a well ventilated area. And now, with all those ends fused together, it's just a case of assembling things. So this one is the wind one. I know that because this is the only one that has the pattern on the top of the stone. And the wind one uses an orange torch, not too sure why. But yeah, just double check things with the orange torch. I mean, it should work fine. Looks like it does. So we can get the base there, pop the torch into the base. With that in the base, we should be able to put this on top. So We need the melted end to just sit right on the top of that lens, like another inch back by the looks of things. I might leave this tape on just to add a little bit of stability in there so these don't come falling apart. But to move this back, can we push it just like that? Does not look like it. This is going to be really hard actually. Oh, okay. I've literally just pushed it really hard and it seems to be doing the trick. So that's more or less flush with this top piece now. I think that's going to work okay. So yeah, just drop this on here and the retention part should slip over the top of the torch. A little bit of persuasion and there we go. So I was like this close to calling the project done, but then I realized I could take it just one step further. So a couple of years ago, I got a gift for Christmas. It was like a bottle with some film inside of it and some LEDs. The LEDs made the film like scatter the light in some way, or sorry, the film made the LEDs scatter the light in some way, which I found really interesting at the time. But I didn't really know what to do with that. A few years passed, eventually got rid of the bottle, I think it broke. But the idea kept on ticking over in my head, and then it hit me. I could make a, I guess, frame to go around the top of these and then cover it with that same film that I saw in the bottle. So I did some research and I found the film. This is the stuff right here. If I open this out a little bit and shine a light through it, don't know how well this will go on camera, but you can kind of see the light gets scattered into like a star shape. After figuring out what film I needed, I went back to Fusion and printed these things. So this is a frame that we can put over the top of these things and basically contain all the lights inside of it, and we can wrap around the frame with this film, and hopefully that's going to give us a much more interesting look than just the fibre optic cables. So yeah, you could leave the project here if you were doing it yourselves. I kind of like this look, to be honest with you. A few changes I'd maybe make is maybe change the length of these a little bit more just to add a bit more variation in them, but I may end up doing that still with the film that we're going to be using. So after printing the parts out, I just glued them together with some super glue, and now we're just going to cover the entire surface of these things with this light scattering film, which I will leave linked in the description if you want to find it yourselves. So just a quick tip guys, if you're going to plan on doing this yourself, I wouldn't recommend trying to do it the same way that I've done it. I found that trying to stick this stuff to the PLA was really hard. I think the main issue was that the film is super glossy, and I guess super glue just did not want to adhere to it in the slightest. What I'd recommend doing is getting some flat clear plastic and attaching the film to that stuff, and then using those flat sheets to then stick to the sides of the frame. It should make things a lot easier. I really struggled doing it this way, and you could definitely save yourself some time doing it the way that I've suggested. And that's about all I've got for you today guys. Really hope you liked the video. If you did, maybe hit the thumbs up button. If you really liked it, consider subscribing. That'd definitely help me out. You could also check out my website, link below. I've got some free files there, so yeah, check those out. That's about everything. Have a good one guys. See you later.